Who is the most overrated person in history? Kibble 2004 said, "It's about the brutality of the crime scenes and the fact he was never found." In 2014 said, Axman wrote a letter calling himself a demonic spirit, which apparently made the town fear him more. The torso killer, he didn't write any letters, no. He just left the bodies of his last two victims outside the window of the office of the detective who was investigating the case. But I will admit, the letters and self-naming are probably two of the major reasons why Jack and Zodiac got famous. Alias said. He was also proved how much the city feared him. He stated that he would kill again at midnight, but any house playing jazz music would be left alone. Now, to be exact, at 12:15, earthly time, on next Tuesday night, I am going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I am going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well, then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it out on that specific Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe. Jazz blared across the city that night, and there was no murders. J. Rolo said. They were used as a sort of petting zoo I guess when Sepala sold Balto and his team to the highest bidder after Kazan and Balto's lower 48 tour, but they were kept in a stuffy room within the museum. I always wondered if Sepala sold them out of spite towards Kazan, who was a total glory thief. I think it's still totally fucked up how they all ended up at a zoo instead of being properly retired into homes. Edit. Source. The Cruelest Miles by Gay Salisbury not only covers Togo's ventures, but everything leading up to the outbreak, the relay, the lockdown, the backstories of everyone involved in the various drivers, and various informations about Alaskan life, aeronautics, sledding, and finally the aftermath of it all. Awesome fucking book with tons of sources. Who loves STEM? I said. Some older answers from years ago when this thread popped up. Archduke Ferdinand is best remembered for his assassination, which caused World War I. The reality of the situation is that World War I would have happened whether he was involved or not. Austria was just looking for an excuse to attack Serbia. Cleopatra wasn't the most impressive Egyptian ruler, that would be Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut accomplished far more for her nation, and she was the only woman to act as pharaoh that was native to Egypt. Cleopatra wasn't even Egyptian. She was Greek. If you can predict the future, maybe write it in plain text. Nostradamus apparently predicted the future, but he recorded his findings in poems that could be interpreted to match any event. Did you know that Pythagoras didn't even invent the Pythagorean theorem, A2 plus B2 equals C2? One of his students actually did, and he stole it. To be fair, he did make it better and proved it, but the student is the one that started the whole thing. Guy Fawkes didn't orchestrate everything. He was just a minor cog in a conspiracy that he didn't even know that much about. He was tasked with a simple objective that he failed. Then, he snitched on every co-conspirator he knew about. He had one job, and he managed to mess up three. Also, Waldo was a top answer last time as well. Never change Reddit. Fair Reception said. Redditors are hilariously predictable. I'm not like the other girls of the social media platforms. You made Meadowitch Reddit said. Reddit is really road that used primarily by university graduates. Train way I passed its stop. Might have been like that a decade ago, but people still pretend it's still like that. Yeah, it's better than Facebook or Twitter, but that's a really low bar. Edit. Lots of people are questioning the used by uni grads thing, so here's a link to a post talking about the front page in 2005, https://www.reddit.com/r/comments/8ripe7. Just from the headlines you can see a massive difference compared to today. Barbara Millison said. King Tut. He didn't really do much, he was just a boy who unfortunately died young. We just happened to find his tomb and it made him famous, lol. The tomb itself, while amazing and much to learn from, is a result of his culture and the line he happened to be born into, not really anything he chose to do. Gadji Rakane said. He's famous because of how well his tomb was preserved, actually resulting from the dullness and short length of his life and reign. His obscurity and the relatively small size of his tomb are actually what kept it hidden while other tombs were excavated or robbed. Smart Spice said. By many accounts she actually looked kind of inbred, or plain at best. She was apparently just super charismatic, intelligent, and well-spoken in about a dozen languages, plus she had the obvious draw of ruthless political power. The whole beautiful seductress narrative came from a combination of her well-documented magnetism and propaganda that downplayed her competence and made Mark Antony look like he'd been manipulated as striking foreign temptress. Still impressive that someone from generations of inbreeding would be notoriously intelligent and charming, but she definitely didn't look like Liz Taylor. Vingerin said. Ancient Egypt's teenage king Tutankhamun was born of an incestuous marriage, scientists said on Wednesday, helping to explain why he limped on a clubfoot and suffered other deformities and genetic defects. Research including tests from the pharaoh's mummy, discovered in 1922 in the Valley of Kings, showed that his parents had been siblings and he had only paternal grandparents. Incestuous alliances were common among Egypt's royalty, said renowned Egyptologist Zahi Hawass. A king could marry his sister and his daughter because he is a god, like Iris and Osiris, and this was a habit only among kings and queens, Hawass told a news conference at Cairo's Egyptian Museum. Source. Joe Climax said. Yeah, and essentially since he was so insignificant his tomb hadn't been raided and ransacked. Everyone else's had been because, you know, some of those tombs are 5,000 years old. You think grave robbers wouldn't steal gold and stuff from a pharaoh's tomb for 5,000 years? Of course they would. So we had never really seen, and photographed, what the tombs looked like untouched. But Tut's tomb was found so late because the entrance had been buried, I believe. Zaya Arober said. The funny thing is, he actually had a big presence in Revolutionary War-era America, just not especially for the Midnight Ride. He is well known for the wrong things. He was a silversmith, engraver, dentist, etc. In the 1760s and 70s he published political engravings for pro-revolutionary newspapers, including the very propagandized depiction of the Boston Massacre we all know from the textbooks that makes it look like a firing squad. He was part of an intelligence-gathering group in Boston. In the mid-1770s there was only a single powder mill in the colonies. In Philadelphia Paul Revere built the second one up in Massachusetts, supplying the Continental Army with gunpowder. He had a brief, mediocre career as a militia officer and was asked to resign. Okay, that part was not so impressive. After the war he opened an iron works and expanded into all kinds of metal manufacturing, from church bells to copper sheathing and cannons for some of America's earliest naval ships. Definitely the kind of guy you wanted in your new country. Edit. Also around 2010-ish a 1760s portrait showing him engraving a silver teapot went viral for his resemblance to actor Jack Black. Leapich said. Paul Revere was a legit badass but he is famous for the Midnight Ride which, was essentially a message relay that he played one part in, the implication being who did the rest of the work that night. Paul Revere had the easy ride, not to say it was safe or trivial, just easy relative to all the other sections of the ride, and there are several other people whose heroic actions during that very same Midnight Ride are underrated. Case in point, I can only remember Paul Revere from the Midnight Ride, and that's from the poem. Raritan said. If you want to see a real badass moment of Paul Revere's, look up his relation to Dr. Joseph Warren. Dr. Warren was a close friend of Revere and a member of the Sons of Liberty. He was killed in the Battle of Bunker Hill by British regulars and dumped in a mass grave. After the war, Revere decided that he wanted Dr. Warren to have a proper burial. So he rode to the site, dug up the mass grave and spent hours digging through rotting soldiers until he eventually recognized Dr. Warren with his dental records. It was crazy stuff. Dunks88 said. She rode 40 miles admirable, more memorable than good old Paul Revere, but neither hold a candle to Israel Bissell who rode 345 miles from Watertown, MA to Philadelphia. If you are interested in how revisionism affects how history is remembered or taught, find and watch the old HBO special called Assume the Position with Mr. Wohl. It's hilarious and super informative. Ada, Assume the Position is available in its entirety on YouTube. Okayest historian said. Charles Manson can, for all intents and purposes, eat a dick. First of all, he wasn't some criminal serial killer mastermind. He was a slighted drug-addicted hippie with a god complex. He may have had followers and instructed them to kill, but it wasn't part of some grand design. First of all, to the uninitiated, Manson didn't actually kill anyone himself. Since I learned that, It kind of shatters the serial killer boogeyman image he has. Tex Watson was his lieutenant who was in person in charge of the Tate and LaBianca murders. The Manson family didn't have the highest kills of any serial killer, nor were they as violent as other murderers like Dahmer, Norris and Bittaker, or Albert Fish. While the Mansons did get notoriety from killing actress Sharon Tate, she wasn't even the real target. Charlie had been to 10,050 Cielo Drive before to pitch a record deal that failed. Since, Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate had bought the house. So it was effectively random. The others killed by the Mansons, the LaBiancas, were middle-aged supermarket owners. Not exactly the kind of people in prime fighting shape. And yet Manson gets all the credit. To quote my wife, Charles Manson is a pussy boy. Ziggsy said. Yeah, overrated is not the same as shouldn't be famous. For what it's worth, I think Christopher Columbus gets my vote for overrated. Kids think he's some explorer genius who was the only one that thought the world was round. When in actuality it was widely accepted the Earth was round and he miscalculated the circumference, used the wrong estimate and should have died before reaching the Indies. But lucked out there was a continent, which he wasn't aware of, right where he'd normally have begun running out of supplies and starved. Fortunately in the last couple's decades his hype has been dying down. Superman's sister Kat said. Jesus, I wanted to know more and just looked it up. Several accounts of cruelty and murder include Spaniards testing the sharpness of blades on native people by cutting them in half, beheading them in contests and throwing natives into vats of boiling soap. There are also accounts of suckling infants being lifted from their mothers' breasts by Spaniards, only to be dashed headfirst into large rocks. There will always be idiots and assholes, but I feel bad for stepping on it, so I don't know how anyone can do stuff like this. That is just a total turning in of your humanity card. Gangs try shit like that out of spite or retribution, maybe. But like, how do you not see a person as far as not chopping them up for sport? I get racism, religion, etc. as far as people living out to fear and insecurity, but the action taken, and what you do with those feelings. Hell, a chimpanzee isn't a person, but I'd never recover from slicing one in half by accident, let alone for sport. They're two people like. 00 Starstruck 00 said. Gandhi. He didn't really win India freedom, WW2 did. His support of the Caliphate movement gave a big boost to Muslim separatism in India. His agreement to partition resulted in 1 million deaths. His idea of self-sufficient villages resulted in India continuing to remain poor and backward and failing to industrialize. His promotion of Nehru over far more competent leaders in the Congress. I can go on. Edit. Lots of comments saying he was racist. Yes, but that was early in his life. He changed considerably later, and the Gandhi we know as Mahatma was not a racist. Mischief Maker said. Not in all history, but Chris McCandless was a fucking moron who does not deserve to be romanticized. Against all advice, he strolled out into the Alaskan wilderness with no idea what he was doing, with no map, underprepared, undersupplied, and with no research into seasonal dangers, smashed up some cabins, shot a moose despite not being able to preserve or store the meat, thought he could teach himself to identify edible wild mushrooms, didn't look beyond the river crossing he initially used where he would have found a hand-operated cable car half a mile away, and died, probably from eating strange seeds, in an abandoned bus on a known hunting trail. He was not pioneering, or inspiring, or bold, or free. He was fucking stupid, and somehow this inspires people. The station agent said. Have you actually read the book Into the Wild? I think it actually does a really good job of showing his foolishness and how what he did devastated his loved ones. He was selfish and naive. The author uses McCandless' story as a parallel to his own similar feelings, and to explain to all the young men and women who may feel a similar way that there is a softer, smarter way to do what McCandless did. I love the book and think it gets a bad rep because people go around pointing out the obvious like it's some big secret. That's the whole point of why his story became famous. Even the movie, which admittedly does romanticize him a bit, is a tragedy. It doesn't take the brightest person to read between the lines and see he wasn't a role model. Marlenska said. Hitler. Hear me out. National Socialism and anti-Semitism was not something he invented, and I am pretty sure that if it wasn't for him somebody else like Goebbels or Hess would have become German dictator. When people say, oh, if only Hitler wasn't born in World War II or the Shoah would not have happened, that's utter bullshit. I wish while teaching about the Holocaust, People would put it into context. The climate of polarization in the 1920s in Germany is very similar to what is going on now in the USA. People were and are seeking out extremists with conspiracy theories to follow because they look for scapegoats. The man on the top is just a symptom for a systemic problem which lies much deeper. Liz Penguin said, I agree that the stage was set for a leader with Hitler's ideals to take power. However, I don't know if it would have escalated as quickly without Hitler's ability to persuade. On paper, leaders knew he was unstable and to be cautious, but when they sat face to face with him, he was able to convince them that he would stop after restoring Germany. He was also a very convincing public speaker. I don't speak German, but I can see the power and confidence in his speeches. I am opposed to everything that he chose to do with his ability to inspire, but I will acknowledge that he was very good at it. It reminds me of Ollivander's words about Voldemort in Harry Potter. After all, he who must not be named did great things. Terrible, yes, but great. B.W. Bird said, unpopular opinion, so was Nikola Tesla. Don't get me wrong, Tesla's inventions revolutionized the world and his name absolutely deserves to be synonymous with science. But so many people think that Tesla was the only worthwhile inventor of his age. The oatmeal even goes as far as to insinuate that Tesla is responsible for every invention from the turn of the 20th century, which is BS. Guglielmo Marconi is responsible for proving the feasibility of radio waves, while Thomas Murray invented the fuse box, which allowed for the safe transmission of electricity through a power grid. Heck, Edison isn't without his accomplishments either. He may not have invented the light bulb, but he made it commercially viable. Edit. Apparently this is not as an unpopular opinion as I thought. GMB92 said, Ronald Reagan. Huge increase in the budget deficit, throwing big military money at a Cold War that was already won, Soviet Union collapsing internally, dumb deregulation, big increases in pollution, biggest moves to increase income and wealth inequality, and one of the big things he gets credit for was mid-80s economic expansion, which was the result of Volcker taming inflation. Top Reagan advisor admits the tax cuts growth claim was a myth. https://www.washingtonpost.com/news/pasteverathing/id-help-create-with-the-help-tax-myth-trump-is-wrong-tax-tax-cuts-myth-with-the yet gets big positive ratings from media and the public, somewhat above average from historians. Very overrated. Segfaulted Earl said, he's easily one of the most likable and charismatic presidents in recent history, but if you actually look at his policies and what they resulted in, he was objectively pretty terrible. In addition to what you listed, he ignored the AIDS epidemic, expanded the war on drugs resulting in mass incarceration of nonviolent drug offenders and wasting millions of dollars, got rid of the Fairness Amendment, which would eventually lead to the mass polarization in media we see today, anti-union and famously shut down plenty of major strikes, greatly contributing to the decline of organized labor and further increasing income inequality, refused to renew the Clean Air Act, Iran-Contra, sold weapons to Iran in order to illegally fund the Contras in Nicaragua, which ultimately destabilized the country in a civil war, funded Afghani rebel groups against the Soviets, ultimately leading to the rise of Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. In fairness, this was started under Carter, but Reagan continued it throughout his full term. Cut funding for federal mental asylums, resulting in an increase in homelessness. I could go on, but hopefully you get the point. The man's policies were a disaster. Squarickle said, Freud. So many of his theories have been thrown out by now, but still he dominates so many classes and textbooks. Edit. Wow, folks. I know he also invented some cool things and sparked a lot of debates, but this thread was about people we find overrated. And for me, that's bingo with Freud. SCSM said, a while ago someone on Reddit had a great comment that yes, while most of Freud's theories ended up not being true, he put on the path of finding discovery in that mental illness wasn't just evil spirits or some incurable mystery. Imagine we're cavemen who had to walk everywhere and Freud showed up with a cart and square wheels. At the time, it would seem revolutionary to cavemen, but looking back now, square wheels suck. But because of the square wheels idea, another caveman was like, what if we make them oval instead? Then a couple years later, another one said we should make them round. Miss Marionette said. Freud is famous for being the guy who was like, let's start somewhere. Of course his stuff isn't accurate, but he was surprisingly sort of on the right track with a few things. He just drew the wrong conclusions. The Oedipus complex is one such. He believed boys want marry and sleep with their mother as children, that there's an emotional incestuous relationship between mother and son. Nowadays experts contend that among certain families mothers are very overbearing and emotionally dependent on their sons to symbolically replace their husbands as partners. The same happens with daughters and single fathers sometimes. A lot of Freud's ideas are off because 1. He is describing behaviors and ascribing reasons to them from a stance of cultural bias. 2. With this cultural bias, he is a chauvinist and already has a preconceived notion of what proper healthy behavior should be for men and women, based heavily on gender roles of the time. Karma Whore Repeating said. Charles de Gaulle. MF was an officer of the army that lost half of France in 2 weeks to the Germans in World War II. Flees like a cockroach to the UK, where somehow embodies the spirit of the resistance, somehow receives the title of general, even though his tasks were not dangerous nor fundamental. When the Allies take over France, he is not in any of the strategic discussions among generals of different armies. Nonetheless, he walks into Paris as their great liberator. Couple of years later gets elected president, because somehow he has managed to keep his popularity. While a president, North African colonies declare war and independence from France. Many people die, and the French economy and territories takes a huge blow. Also, he managed to dismantle the oldest European university of the world, Université de Paris. But new. His name is on an airport, many avenues and countless plazas across France. 6 Cup said. Almost everything you said is factually wrong. So your whole opinion of the man is absolute garbage. Before starting to review your bullshit, I need to preface everything by saying I'm not a de Gaulle fan, absolutely not. But I despise him for actual legit reason, not stupid revisionism like you do. MF was an officer of the army that lost half of France in 2 weeks to the Germans in World War II. De Gaulle is literally one of the only French officer that had some result during the early days of the war. https://fr.wikipedia.org/wiki/Badil_de_Montcornet. Flees like a cockroach to the UK. De Gaulle was asked to be present at the Bruyere conference. He was present there because he had just been named state secretary and was acting as an official for the government, and not the army, which at the time had already fled Paris BTW. 6 Cup said. There he met Churchill, and since de Gaulle was one of the only French who wished for France to stay in war, the two really liked each other. And since the French government had decided to surrender, de Gaulle decided to leave for London. Here somehow embodies the spirit of the resistance. And why do you think he was seen as that? De Gaulle was already a bit famous before the war even started. He had released a book before the war that basically crucified the decision of the French army, and laid out what he would do if he was in charge. Almost everything he predicted turned out to be right, and like I said, he was one of the only officers who actually won a battle. That made of him the most obvious choice. Amaho receives the title of general, even though his tasks were not dangerous nor fundamental. He was titled general before going to London. And the reason why he was named general is because he was already acting as one. And I'm not saying he pretended to be one, he literally had all the responsibilities of a general over his battalion. You remember, that's that one battalion which is one of the only few that actually won something? When the Allies take over France, he is not in any of the strategic discussions among generals of different armies. 6 Cup said. Eisenhower absolutely hated him, and didn't want him anywhere near strategic decision. For example, de Gaulle was not aware of the actual date of D-Day. But the Allies still relied on him for the organization of the territory once they gained it back. When de Gaulle arrived in Paris, he had already put an entire new French administration in Normandy. Nonetheless, he walks into Paris as their great liberator. He was the voice of the resistance for nearly 4 fucking years. You were casually forgetting that. Also, he's not the first French to enter Paris, it's Leclerc that is actually considered the great liberator. A couple of years later gets elected president, because somehow he has managed to keep his popularity. It's funny you realize your own view of history literally doesn't match what people that actually lived during that era believed. But nah, it's them that are stupid for that, and not you that can be wrong. While a president, North African colonies declare war and independence from France. The war in Algeria started in 1954. De Gaulle was elected president in 1956 for the second time specifically because of that war that destabilized the previous governments. The Fourth Republic couldn't handle a crisis like that, and people basically begged for the return of de Gaulle. De Gaulle accepted to come back as president, but only if he could rewrite the constitution. That's why we're now in our Fifth Republic, and one of the legacy we have from de Gaulle that I hate the most. 6 Cup said. LSO he managed to dismantle the oldest European university of the world. Even that you can't fucking get it right. It's actually insane how you got literally everything wrong. What you're talking about happened in 1970, so that was under Pompidou. And also it was in reaction to the request of the student themselves, and it's not like the university stopped existing. It was simply split into smaller ones so it would be easier to manage. Also, the University of Paris has never been the oldest university of the world. It isn't even the first university in France, nor the second. And it had already ceased to exist before, so even if it was one of the first to be created, it wouldn't be one of the oldest. The university you're claiming he dismantled was actually not even 120 years old. But new. His name is on an airport, many avenues and countless plazas across France. Everything you think you know about de Gaulle is wrong. So it's no wonder you don't understand why French people loved him. De Gaulle had many actual flaws. You could have talked about his decisions that led to the war in Indochine for example. But nope, you decided to rewrite history, with absolutely bonker claims.